Hello, everyone, and welcome to Quadrant 4 Politics. Today we're doing a comment episode to episode number 7, where we discussed the Electoral College. These are the comments we received on that episode. The main question of the day was, do we need the Electoral College? As always, my name is Riley, and I'm here with my good friend and co-host, Matt. Go ahead and say hello.
Hi.
So let's just jump right in to these comments.
All right.
Let's see here. So Tobias_Ketterberg. Oh, I guess before we start, I want to say these are mostly comments that we got from Reddit, and they were mostly posted in libertarian and conservative subreddits. So they're mostly coming from that perspective. Just a heads up to the listeners if they're interested in who these comments are coming from. But the first comment is from Tobias_Ketterberg, and he says, yes, in response to the question, do we need the Electoral College? Yes, because then there is zero incentive for states that aren't California, Illinois, Texas, or New York to even participate, since they will have zero say. We would not have a United States. What's your response to that question, to that comment?
My response is wondering if he meant to say no, because he's saying only a few states would be participating, which is usually...
No, he's saying yes, we do need the electoral college, because if we didn't, the only states that would matter are California, Illinois, Texas, and New York. Every other state wouldn't have incentive.
Well, that's what they usually say about the presidential campaigning, is that they'd only go to the big cities.
Yeah.
But the other end of that is that voters will only come out in swing states. Either way, I don't think it's, too substantial. I mean, it's an argument that's been thrown out. But ultimately, I think people like to vote even in non-swing states. Even if you're a die-hard Republican in New York, you still want to vote because you want your voice to be heard.
Yeah.
And it's also, how can we bicker back and forth about the popular vote if nobody comes out to vote? The only reason we get to complain about the popular vote is because we record it, even though as it stands now it means nothing. So that's my take on that.
The main reason I wanted this comment to be included is because something that I really wanted to stress about that we talked about in the episode. If you're listening to this episode and you haven't listened to the actual number 7 episode, you need to go check that one out, because that's where we have all of our good facts and opinions. But one of the main things that really inspired me, in my opinion, on the Electoral College was that even if you take like the 90 most populated cities in the United States, it still only accounts for like 19% of the population or some shit like that.
Really?
Yeah, remember that was something we talked about, and that was something that was really important to my argument, was that like people seem to think that California and New York will rule the country if we just go on the popular vote, but the fact of the matter is that just isn't true. There's enough people spread out through this country that 2 states won't just have control. And I think if we have a vote that's more based on the popular vote instead of just the Electoral College, it will incentivize people to go out and vote because they feel that they'll have a stronger opinion. And the fact of the matter is that the largest political party in this country is the party of non-voters. And if we can get those people to vote, we'll get more of the we'll get more input from the people, and that's my point.
I'd say I disagree about it not changing thing, because in 5 of the last elections, the popular vote was won by the Republicans once, and of the 5 last elections, the Republicans won 3 of the presidencies. So I'd say the states do have... Those states, California and New York, do have...
Well, you're also got to consider the disenfranchised voters, like New York and California, the Republicans in New York and California. If we go more on a popular vote system, they have more incentive to show up to the polls, whereas there's a lot of people who don't show up to the polls because they know it's worthless.
The thing
why
is,
take the time to go vote?
Republicans are known as people who are going to show up and vote. Democrats are the ones where it's hard to get them to show up to vote unless they really care about the person or the cause. And even Democrats will admit that. Republicans vote religiously, but I mean, so I guess like it might have a little bit of a difference, but I don't know if it would have enough to swing the popular vote.
I don't want to spend too much time on this comment, but the main reason I wanted to bring this comment up again is because that idea that the most populated states are the ones that are going to control the country just isn't true. They, like I said, the top. I don't have the exact facts. Listen to episode 7 because I had them written down then. But it's something like the top 90 most populous cities in this country only account for a minority of the population in the country, and I think that's a really important fact. Let me see. This next comment is from LSD is cool, with spelled Kewl.
Oh,
This guy, man, he's a pimp. Anyways, he has a little bit of a longer comment here. He says, the Electoral College's purpose is to make certain an unfit populist or agent of a foreign power could not obtain the presidency on the backs of the unwashed masses. Those states you think would attempt to succeed, essentially the entire South, I presume, or I assume, are financially dependent on New York, New Jersey, and California. These 3 states financially subsidize the entire South. So assuming they were allowed to leave the Union, there is no constitutionally valid mechanism for such a thing to take place, but saying that they did, they would instantly collapse due to the lack of federal handouts. Every red state other than Texas, they would collapse due to the lack of federal handouts. And then he says, every red state other than Texas are economic failures and have been for about a century. The ignorant cultists in Trumpland votes should not have exponentially more power in determining the president than the majority of the nation. Additionally, those states who contribute nothing to the wealth of this nation and require a never-ending flow of federal dollars to compensate for their failed economic and social policies should sit down, shit their yap, I think he meant shut their yap, and let the adults be bothered with the leading. As has become evident to the entire planet, there is only one political party in the USA that has the ability or desire to lead and values the Constitution. That last segment right there we talked about before the show, we're not exactly sure what party he's referring to, but because he is talking so poorly of the red states, I'm assuming he thinks that the Democratic Party is the only one that has the ability or desire to lead and values the Constitution, which I think is not true.
Yeah, I think that's laughable. Can I say that?
So this is an interesting comment because I agree with what he says about how those red states are economic failures. I mean, if California was its own country, it would be one of the economic powers of the world. And those red states like Alabama and Mississippi, they have high teen pregnancy rates instead. They don't have much economic power. And they probably do require a whole lot of federal funding. I don't know a whole lot about that, so I can't speak on the facts of that.
That was kind of my point. And before we started this episode, we discussed which comments we wanted to have, and I wasn't really in favor of this one. And the reason is because the person lists that. Well, first of all, this is a response to another one we didn't discuss, where the person says the states would secede. So that's what he was talking about there. But to say like California is a economically well-off state, I think is like a drastic error. Like, it's not known as a state that's doing so well because it's buckling under its own size and its own regulations.
It has one of the biggest economies in the world, but it is...
How's its economy doing? Which is what this person doesn't bring up, is the person talks about the economic failures, but there's so many different ways to measure an economy. And if the red states aren't doing as well, the Midwest red states, because he or she excludes Texas, so I'm assuming talking about the heartland or the Midwest, what the person's saying is that they need more financial assistance or whatnot, but those are the states providing our food and our coal. Mm-hmm. So
I agree with you.
I don't think the person uses a lot of statistics to make their point.
I think this person is attacking the red states too strongly. This is probably a liberal who got into the comments somehow. But
Well, it's not like we restricted them. And
no.
we-
I love hearing their opinions, and I value their opinions. But the way this guy, he's attacking these people, these states, and I think it's too violent of an attack. I think we do rely on these states for a lot of things. If California became its own country, I'm sure it would have a significant economic collapse of its own. So we need to be friends with these people. I mean, we have individual states and we both believe in states' rights, but we're still a united country and we rely on each other to get by. So I think that he has some interesting points in this about the economic and I support that he supports a more popular vote idea because the red states rely on the blue states so much. But I just feel like he's attacking the red states too much, and he's not giving them enough credit. Like, they still deserve a say in the presidency, and that's why I don't like. I think a popular vote would be a good idea, but I just think that the electoral college as it is right now is broken, and if we fixed it in a way that was more fair, then that would be the best ideal system.
Well, I think that comes up later in the comments, so continue reading.
Cool. Yeah, let's go to the next one. This is from STEM Throwaway 1. And let me see here. He has 2 comments here, so I'm just going to go ahead and read both of them back to back. He says he's in total disagreement. I think he's in favor of the Electoral College. He says, American politics is intentionally slow and a pendulum, and the Electoral College exists as it does today because the most populous states should not have an absolute say on what the smaller states do. The Electoral College has flaws, but the largest of them have to do with the winner-take-all methodology, not with the weighted votes by state. There's a reason for the Connecticut Compromise of the legislative branch of government, and with that comes the Electoral College. There's a reason Franklin said, "A republic if you can keep it." The big problem with any voter reform is that people base their stances on what would help their team win, rather than what be objectively fair. Democracy isn't fair. The lynchings in the South were democracy in action. Sometimes that means that Wyoming matters more than California. Sometimes that means that Democrats in Ohio matter more than 1 million Republican voters in Texas. The system as it is currently may not be perfect, but it is more perfect than a direct representative democracy. I think there's certainly a case for adjusting it, but as it stands now, it really is a more perfect union.
So that's part 1 of the comments. So I think that's a really good comment. I think in the last episode, in episode 7, I said that, my position was kind of that you can believe, I don't have a strong position one way or another, popular vote, electoral college. I just think there are things about the Electoral College people aren't considering because they're too consumed with worrying about if it's fair. But this one actually makes me believe in the Electoral College a little bit more. He makes some great points. And what's that last part he said?
The system as it is currently may not be perfect, but it is more perfect than a direct representative democracy. I think there's certainly a case for adjusting it, but as it stands now, it really is a more perfect union.
So yeah, and earlier in that comment, he said that adjusting how we do the Electoral College, for example, the winner take all by state, might not necessarily be the best system. Maine and Nebraska both award 2 votes to the winner take all of their state, and then they break it up by their districts, and so they can split their votes. And if we did that across the country, it might be a little bit more fair to where states would still be represented, but it'd represent all the people in the states a little bit better.
I'm going to finish the rest of his comment here, or his second comment. Again, this is from STEM Throwaway 1. I agree that there are partisans that will defend a voting system because it benefits them, but I more take issue to fairness in terms of elections, especially after this reply. Democracy isn't inherently more fair, it's just easier to explain than other systems. 2016 is a great example of this. Tons of people from California and New York came out and complained when Clinton lost because she had the popular vote, ignoring that she only won big in California and New York, and everywhere else were mild victories and a lot more losses outside of those states. Clinton lost Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Florida, and Ohio, all states that voted for Obama twice. Despite the recovery in larger urban centers, a lot of suburban and rural communities never really recovered. Direct democracy would have failed, coming simply from a voting standard, not from the content of the candidate. By imposing the will of the two larger states on the larger discontent within the union of people from different kinds of communities across the country. That's not to say that some form of democracy/representation is a bad thing. There's a reason the U.S. is a republic and why voting in it is a good thing, but fairness itself does not spring out of purely democratic methods, which was more to my larger point.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to reply to pretty much the whole thing he says. In the first part, he says American politics is intentionally slow. I hate that. I hate that politics is slow. I hate that government's slow. I think that is actually a significant problem in this country that we have to.
Well, it was actually designed that way.
I know, and it's shitty.
Well,
it's terrible that it is that way because we're a fast-moving society. You know, we have the city that never sleeps and shit like that. I feel like things change so rapidly, especially with technology. I think we need to have a government that's more effective and productive than a bunch of old fogies who don't know what they're doing and taking forever to make up their mind.
Well, that's why
I can see the benefit of it because if it moved a lot quicker, then we get a lot of regulations really quick, and then it gives them time to figure out if those regulations actually make sense or not. But I just hate that the college or that the government's
and Ralph
slow.
Nader one time complained about the fact that it takes so long to pass something through Congress because they send the document back and forth between the two houses. But that's how it's supposed to work. That's how it was set up to work. But anyway, I guess that's neither here nor there when it comes to the electoral
It's
college.
also a bit off topic. But again, he says populous states would have an absolute say on what the smaller states do. That is incorrect, as I have stated a couple times already. Let me see here.
If you take it at base value, it's incorrect. But I think you're forgetting that it would disproportionately affect the people in different states who do things different ways. New York and California would get to decide for those middle states.
I disagree with that, but it's something we talked about on the actual episode. I don't want to discuss it here. Let me see here. I don't understand his idea of democracy isn't fair. The lynchings in the South were democracy in action. What does he mean by that?
Well, he means that it was democracy is of the people, kind of a popular vote idea. They were legal. They were sanctioned. There was nothing wrong with them as it was seen at the time.
That wasn't murder.
No, it was, I guess it depends on the period of time and where you were. But, for example, I guess just take slavery. That was democracy in action, But democracy, as he goes on to say, isn't always the right thing. It's not always fair. It just happens to be the system that works best is when everybody has a say. But in times when we were less developed, and maybe in the future they'll be saying that about us now.
See, I don't think that the lynchings in the South were democracy in action. I don't think that has anything to do with democracy. I think I don't even see how it applies. Democracy is a system of government, and the lynchings in the South is like, racism might have been abundant in the South back then, but it doesn't have anything to do with how governments run. I don't believe that has any application to the Electoral College. I think it's just
unless
a dumb argument.
the lynchings were legal.
I don't know if they were or not. I don't really I don't have a whole lot of knowledge of that, but it still doesn't seem like the people voted on that.
But what he's saying is bad things can still happen within a democracy. So
the next thing in his comment that I want to bring up is he said a big problem with any voter reform is that people base their stances on what people on what would help their team win rather than what be objectively fair. I think this is a really good point. I think that one of the main reasons that Republicans like the Electoral College is because it helps their team. I think one of the main reasons Democrats are unhappy with it is because there's been 3 or 4 times in history that it has affected them the wrong way. Just like with Bush and Trump, how the popular vote did not end up winning. And I think that because of that, both Republicans and Democrats can't have a honest-based conversation about the Electoral College because they just see that it's helping the other team win based on the decision. I feel like no one can have a good debate about what can be the happy medium. They just want what will help their team win.
Well,
So
that's true. There was I think a senator a state senator, something from Pennsylvania. He's a Republican, and he was going to vote, to make Pennsylvania one of the states where they base their electoral college votes on what the United States popular vote is. And then when Trump won, Pennsylvania, he's like, wait, a Republican won Pennsylvania. So he kind of backstepped that. However, let's see what the person said. Where was it at? We were talking about people not being able to here's what I was trying to say. Sorry. Lost my spot. As I mentioned on the last episode, the Electoral College is something actually that both parties see as unfair. And I looked up a couple different statistics, and both of them had, definitely the Democrats saw it as more unfair, but it was still, the Republicans were like over 60% as seeing it unfair. So it's a question of, are you okay with an unfair system if it's advantageous to you?
Yeah.
And so where I come from, especially, I was leaning towards Electoral College before, but I think there's enough argument now for me to say that put politics aside and the Electoral College really does work best. But it's not just something that's a Republican-Democrat divide, like Republicans love it, Democrats hate it. And one day it could work the other way. It could end up, Democrats win, and we'll see if Republicans complain at that time.
For sure. Parties do change over time. And, it could be that the farmers in the rural areas become Democrats all of a sudden. But the last thing I wanted to say about his comment, it's not really related to the Electoral College, but I like his discussion about how Clinton really only won big in California and New York, whereas all of her other victories were mild, they were disappointing victories. She should have done better. And then she lost a lot of states that should have been hard locks for blues. I think it doesn't really relate to the Electoral College, and I don't think I don't think it supports a popular vote or the Electoral College. I just think it's a good reminder that she really wasn't that great of a candidate. But I guess my response to his comment in general would just be, I think a system that supports the popular vote more will support more people showing up to voting. And I think that's an important thing that's good.
I think people should show up anyway, because that way,
I agree, but
if they want to complain about the popular vote, they have to show up to do it. So if you're, like I said, Republicans are going to show up anyway.
Yeah.
Republicans vote. Mm-hmm. Democrats, if you guys want to be able to complain, you got to win that popular vote and lose the electoral vote, and then you get your reason to complain. But if you don't show up, if George Bush only won in 2004 because they felt defeated from 2000, well, maybe they lost the opportunity to say, okay, 2 times in a row this guy didn't win a popular vote, but, he did end up going on to win in 2004. So.
Okay, so the next comment is from Lorax91, and he actually had 2 comments back to back, so I'm just going to read through both of them. He puts forward an interesting premise. He says, let's say almost everyone in the country moved to one state, and there were only 1,000 people left in each of the other 49 states. Would you seriously argue that 49,000 people should control the lives of over 300 million others? That's essentially what the Electoral College is doing. If most people choose to live in a handful of states, then absolutely those states should have the most influence in picking the president. We already have Congress and the courts to balance the president's power, so why screw people in populous states to coddle people in less populous states? Do you have a reply to this one? Here, I'm passing off to Matt.
Okay. So, I mean, obviously, first of all, it's just unrealistic. And
For sure. The premise is.
If that, I mean, the way the Electoral College is divided up is based on population because it's based on the number of senators plus the number of representatives. So it's already based on population. And so what would end up happening is all those people that move to that one state would be worth more than the 270 votes because every other state, 49 times 3, that comes to what, like 150 or whatnot?
Yeah.
So that one state would still have more of the votes. And it's not that, I mean, if that happens, I guess we can get to that point. We can talk about it. But for right now, every state's got at least 500,000 people. Between 500,000 and 33 million, which is what California has or something. Mm-hmm. Or is that just, I don't know. But, they each have within a certain amount, and I think we can make the system work as it is.
If you allow me to reply, I think I understand the fear of the most populous states getting most of the control. I understand the fear from the Republicans and the people who live in rural areas. Not necessarily even Republicans, just people who worry that the cities are going to be deciding how they live their lives. And I think, I'm a libertarian, I believe in personal responsibility, and I think a lot of it is, yes, these people grew up in cities and they may have never known what farm life is actually like. I think that it is the job of people in rural areas to have campaigns, and they should have their politicians campaign in the city saying, hey, based on I'm basing this in, let's say the popular vote was the system we were using. I think it would be the responsibility of the people who live in the rural areas to have their politicians go into the cities and say, hey, this is how life is like in the farmland, and this is why you need to take our lifestyle into your consideration. Whereas right now, the Electoral College, it kind of divides us because I don't have any kind of I've grown up pretty much in this area of the suburbs of Seattle. I have family that lives in rural areas of Oregon and Washington, but I don't really know that cowboy lifestyle too much, and so I'm ignorant to that information, and there's no one out there teaching me what life is really like for them in those areas. And if the Electoral College allows us to continue this ignorance of people in the farmland don't know what it's like to live in the city, and people in the city don't know what it's like to live in the farmland. But if we had a popular vote, the farmland people would be forced to have their opinion presented or their needs presented to the people in the populous areas. And I feel like that would educate society, and we would be more welcoming and more united that way. Whereas right now it's like, no, we don't need to tell them how our lifestyle is. We need the Electoral College to protect us. Well, I think that's dumb. Do you understand my point?
I do, and I think I see it completely opposite, and I think you're making a great case for why we need the Electoral College, because you're saying we should get everybody from Nebraska, Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, Nebraska, Kansas, get those people, get their politicians out to California, shout their voices, send some of them up to New York, say, this is how things work on the farm, and then, say your Midwestern prayers and hope that they change their mind, and that's not realistic. So what we do instead is we have an Electoral College that says we are going to have this system where everybody throughout the United States gets a say. The
Well,
states are voting.
I understand you saying that these people all of a sudden would say we can educate them, but there's a good chance they're still not going to support our ideas. The fact of the matter is that we rely on these other states to help us. We live in a city area. We live in the suburbs of Seattle, and so we rely a lot on the farmland to bring us our food and other necessities. And what I'm saying is going on the basis of if we had a popular vote, I think it's their responsibility. We're at 29 minutes. We got plenty of time. It's their responsibility based on the popular vote that they would be responsible for educating us on their lifestyle and what they need. And if we chose as people who live in the city to not vote in their favor without their consideration, if we make choices not considering them in any way, shape, or form, then they're going to have their downfall and we're going to experience it. All of a sudden we're going to have lower amounts of food, and it will be a lesson for us, because we'll be like, shit, we fucked up because we didn't appreciate the farmland and now we don't have food. And in the next election we'll learn. I think a lot of it is we need to learn by failure. It's try a system. You do it in video games. It's a try it out method. I can't think of the word right now, but I think we need to fail sometimes to learn, and that's why we have history, is because we can look at how people failed in the past so we don't make those mistakes again. And I feel like right now the Electoral College is just encouraging us to be ignorant to what's going on and be constantly fighting with each other. But if they were forced to be responsible for educating us and we were forced to learn from our failures of not supporting them, then we would be more united as a country.
And would you agree that's planning for failure rather than learning from failure?
Well, I think that's kind of a weird question. I think that.
Well, you said we should try it out. And then,
well, I'm saying that if us people in the city decide not to listen to the rural people, the farmers, we don't listen to what they say and we say fuck them, we're going to vote the way we think. We think that being transgender is more important than the crops, then we learn from that mistake. And I think that it's you can say yes, we're preparing for failure or whatever you said, but I think we can still learn from that failure. I think that learning is a good thing, and I think that it's something that will bring us all together.
Well, I think we should prepare for success. Is just kind of my point there. Also, something you said in your comment was like, yes, it would be, the people in the cities telling the, people in the middle of the country. So you're basically saying, yeah, it would be the big people telling the small people. But, I mean, you can also look at that as, the majority versus the minority. I guess, what it comes down to for me is that we are a democracy, but we're also a republic. Was it this person? One of the comments the person said, the president is the president of the United States. So
I believe that's the next comment. Do you want to jump into that?
Well, yeah, because we kind of already talked about a lot of what he said, but
okay. I'll read it now.
Yeah, okay.
All right. The next comment is from Alpha Tango Foxtrot. This guy has actually commented. He sent us his comments before, so thank you for being a repeat customer. We appreciate it.
And this is one of the best comments. So.
Yeah, this is probably one of the best. He says, yes, we do need the Electoral College. The president is the president of the Union of States, not the president of the people of the U.S. What we really need is to start enforcing the 10th Amendment and narrow the scope of the commerce and general welfare clauses. I'm just going to butt in real quick just so everyone knows. The 10th Amendment, we did research before, and it's essentially saying that the states need the right, give states the rights if it's not in the Constitution.
Somebody on Google asked, what is the 10th Amendment in simple terms? It says, the 10th Amendment was included in the Bill of Rights to further define the balance of power between the federal government and the states. The amendment says that the federal government has only those powers specifically granted by the Constitution. So this guy is saying we need to enforce that, because that's obviously, I don't think anybody can say that's the case now.
Yeah.
That that's all the federal government's doing is acting off the Constitution.
So it's saying that we need to respect the states' rights. Okay, so continuing on, the federal government should primarily deal with extra national affairs and interstate disputes. People's lives should be most impacted by their state and not the federal government.
Agreed.
True, you could say the Electoral College gives the flyover states a more proportional say, but it is a balance. Sure, the liberal cities would love to pass a bunch of laws, but they have no idea how the whole country works. I honestly had someone from NYC, New York City, come to Kentucky, see a field where the livestock was inside that day due to the rain, and said, "Why is all that land open? We could build so many houses there and help the homeless." This was a grown adult, college educated with a master's. I was in shock that I had to explain to him, this is where your food comes from. It doesn't magically show up at Whole Foods. We need the Electoral College to preserve the balance. Sure, there are fewer people in the rural areas, and yes, people vote not land, quote unquote. But as long as the federal government is as pervasive as it is, we need a way to ensure people who spend their entire life in one city can't make decisions for people who have spent their whole life on farms. And of course, the opposite is true. The farm folk would have no clue what a city the size of New York needs. But I find of the two, the farm folk want to be left alone. The farm folk want to be left alone. The city folk want to quote unquote do something. This is why we have states, and I repeat myself, this is why we need to rein in the Fed and enforce the 10th. New York for New Yorkers, Texas for Texans.
Nail on the head. Hit it. Perfect. Love it.
So he's essentially saying that the Electoral College is fine the way it is, but we need to take away power from the federal government. And I agree with taking power away from the federal government, but I still think that the Electoral College, the way it is flawed, and I think it needs to be fixed to be a little bit more fair. And I think the Electoral College needs to be fixed to encourage more people to vote. But his main argument is we need to take power away from the federal government, and I 150% agree with that.
Yeah. I think a lot of these comments just made a good point about, you're voting for your electors to vote for the president. Now, I've said I hate the idea of electors. We don't really need them. I mean, we can just have the number. We all know how to add up. But, for the sake of bureaucracy, we still do that. Mm-hmm. But, he or she someday is the president of the United States. And those states should be able to act and behave how they want to. And if a state wants somebody to be president, great. And if they don't, great. But I think this person makes a good point in that if the 10th Amendment was enforced, the Electoral College wouldn't be as bad because your states would still be able to do whatever they want. So you wouldn't have Trump able to say, I'm going to come after the states that are legalizing weed, because that comes ultimately from the FDA, which isn't in the Constitution. So if we look at the 10th Amendment, the federal government has no right to tell a state what they can do with weed or not,
Yeah.
So in that case, it would just make the Electoral College less of an issue if we better enforce the 10th Amendment. And so I think this person's the winner of the day for best comment.
Comment of the day.
And I really like...
Send us your mail address. We'll send you a gift.
That's true. We will. We'll give you, like $1 or something. But I really like what they said about the, person from New York coming to Kentucky. And, it's like you don't know what other places are like. So
well, I also really liked, which is something I didn't even think of. I liked what he said about people in the farmland don't know what it's like to be in the city, and so giving them more power in the federal government doesn't make sense because they can change our lives in the city. And this is something we don't really need to go on a huge debate about because it's not the topic of the day. But just discussing abortion, maybe the farmland states are like, if abortion is wrong, if someone has a baby that they don't want, one of their friendly neighbors will just take over, and they'll help take care of the baby. Whereas here in the city, we'll be like, hold up, we don't have space for unwanted people. Abortion, we need this abortion because it's like we don't have an extra room that we can take care of another baby. None of your neighbors have that. So, and that was a dumb representation, but that was just an idea of like, they don't know what it's like in the city, and so it's dumb that they should be making that they should have more power in the federal government to decide what our life is like here, because there's the extremes of both, and they're in so much fear about us controlling their lives. We should also be in fear of them controlling our lives.
Yeah, except they don't have the numbers right now to do that. Except
Well, I'm saying that the Electoral
College
College currently is in their favor.
So let me tell you what I think. I guess this would kind of be my final word, is that we want to elect the president democratically. In the last election, there was no person elected democratically, because while Trump got 46 and Hillary got 48, there was not a single person that 50% or more of the country agreed on. So I think the Electoral College is a good way to get there. And what we could do is we can say, unless the popular vote exceeds 51%, or 50%, sorry, because then you can say, well, more than half the citizens. But then otherwise, we're going to go based off the states, because otherwise we're going to have 50 runoff elections,
Yeah.
and make our ballots super as complicated. But in researching the previous times that the popular candidate didn't win, I found one time of the 5 where the person actually got a majority of it, and I was like, that's just wrong. Like, and in that I was just like, wow, that system's just wrong. And that also goes back to that person's question of, should 49,000 people be able to control it? Well, not like that. So I think that would be one thing that would fix the problem, is the Electoral College is the answer to what happens when we as a country can't agree on who our president's going to be. That would be my final word, Riley.
Very good final word, Matt. My final statement on this would be, I think the popular vote is the one I would prefer. However, I would be okay with the Electoral College if they fixed the system and made it more welcoming to third parties. And we discussed this earlier, that a lot of people view the Electoral College based on what party they support. Democrats want to get rid of it because it would support their party. Republicans are in favor of it the way it is right now because it's supporting their party. I'm in favor of whatever helps my party, the Libertarian Party, get on the stage, but also supporting more third-party candidates. And one thing that you said, you said it briefly right now and in the last episode, that if we just allowed the popular vote to go, there could be a bunch of candidates on the ballot, and that could become really confusing and annoying. And the solution to that, I would say, is let people write in a candidate or a party in one election, and then in the next election, if that person or party who was written in before received like a significant amount of votes, like 2% or 3% of the votes, or something like a significant, like there's people interested in this, then they should be included in the next election, because I think the two-party system's killing us. And I think
the person could be dead. A lot of stuff changes in 4
voting
years.
in a party necessarily instead of a person, but the person also represents a party,
I mean,
unless they're
we've had the Electoral College with 3, with
but
a
the
third
way it's
party,
set up
and
right now is it doesn't. I don't want an Electoral College that's like encouraging third parties. I just want an Electoral College that gives third parties a chance.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can all agree there's, definitely room for revision to where everybody in the country can have a say and feel like their say matters, but you're also looking out for states' interests, and there can be a downside to just, this person got 40% and their 40% was the highest,
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I think the lowest the president's won with was like 37%, and that's not democracy.
Yeah.
So just because you win the popular vote, I mean, drives me crazy that people don't take that into consideration, which was my original point, is even if you hate the Electoral College, think of some of the advantages it offers. But, you know, I think that's
We're at 44 minutes right now. I just want to ask you one question, a little
Sure,
bit
what's
off
that?
topic, a little bit on topic. Who do you think is going to win the election in 2020? Presidential. And how do you think the Electoral College will go?
If I had to put money on it right now, here's what I would do. I would put my money on Trump, because putting your money on any Democrat right now is stupid, because they haven't had their primaries. And so Trump's got the best shot right now.
Well, I guess Trump or Democrats.
Or Democrat
or,
X.
Howard Schultz or whoever in the
I've
Republican Party
I've
decides
heard
to run against Trump.
I've heard people on both sides of the aisle who have expressed the thought that they think Trump will get a second term. Of course, there have been people that have said absolutely not, no way. Well, that's what we said the first time. You know, it really depends on who the Democrats run. If they run Joe Manchin from West Virginia, I will support him. That's the only Democrat I would support. Other than that, what Democrat do I think has the best chance?
Okay,
Maybe Joe Biden.
Let's keep it on topic because I don't want this to go on for too long. Do you think that this is going to be another year of the Electoral College being a problem?
Yeah, I was going to say there's a good chance it will become the first time where a candidate twice in a row loses the popular vote and wins the Electoral College. And that might lead to real change, especially with it being Trump, who's such a controversial president.
Yeah.
That could end up leading to real change.
Do you think that's going to happen, or do you think that's unlikely at this point?
I mean, when you put all the factors together, it's unlikely, but it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine him winning the popular vote, but he won the Electoral College, you know, so much more than was expected in 2016. Who's to say he's not going to do it again?
Yeah.
So, I mean, right now, if it was Democrat X versus Trump, I would put my money on Trump. As far as the Democrats go, I think he's probably going to... I think there's a good chance he might be facing Kamala Harris, senator from California, who's got the female angle and then also the African-American angle. But we'll see. I mean, it's way too early. People make these predictions way too early, and they're never right. So I think, you know, having a more moderate is going to be helpful in defeating Trump. So.
Cool. Well, thank you for the input, Matt. You're very knowledgeable about that kind of stuff, so I appreciate it.
I try.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to episode 7.5. This is Quadrant 4 Politics. These comments mostly came from Reddit, but please feel free to leave us a comment on YouTube or SoundCloud or the email address quadrant4politics@gmail.com, and that is the number 4, not spelled out. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you in the next one.
Take care.